The cool clink of Emma Hawthorne's glass echoed in the quiet bar. But it was the sight in front of her that made her heart stutter. There, at a corner table, sat Daniel, the man she had spent 15 years with, leaning in close to a striking woman. His hand was casually placed on her shoulder, and Emma could feel her stomach tighten in that moment. The woman laughed, her fingers brushing against Daniel's, a gesture far too intimate for just friends. Emma had always believed their life was perfect. She had spent years building her own successful interior design business while balancing the needs of her family. The luxurious home, the vacations, their 2 children. All of it was the product of Daniel's real estate empire and her careful support. She had been eager to share the news of a new contract that would elevate her career even further. But now, as she stood frozen at the entrance of the bar, the excitement she had carried all day began to slip through her fingers. Daniel, a man who had always projected an image of success and stability, was sitting there in front of her, intimately entwined with a woman Emma had never seen before. Her heart thudded in her chest as she watched Daniel gently brush a lock of hair behind the woman's ear, a touch he hadn't shared with her in years. The sting of betrayal hit Emma in waves as his wedding ring caught the soft light of the bar, reminding her of the life she thought they had built together. The world around her seemed to blur, the air heavy with disbelief. For a moment, Emma's instinct was to turn around, leave quietly, and pretend she hadn't seen anything. She could drive home, hide the truth from herself, from their children, from everyone. But something deep within her stirred. A quiet resolve, a sense of dignity that told her this moment, this discovery, demanded something different. She wasn't going to run away. She would face him, even if it meant shattering the life she'd so carefully curated. With a deep breath, Emma straightened her back, adjusted the black blazer she had just bought for the office, and walked toward the booth where Daniel and the woman sat. Her mind felt oddly detached as she approached, each step purposeful. When she reached the table, she met Daniel's stunned gaze with a calm she didn't entirely feel. She turned toward the woman and simply said, "Hello, darling." The silence at the table was deafening, and Emma could see the color drain from Daniel's face as the woman looked between them, clearly confused. But Emma was no longer the woman who silently accepted her husband's flaws. She had just stepped into a new chapter of her life, one where she would demand the truth, face the consequences, and reclaim the future she deserved. As Daniel struggled to speak, Emma felt something shift inside her. The years of loyalty and devotion seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet, unstoppable force. But how had it come to this? How had the life she thought she had built so carefully come to unravel in such a devastating moment? As Emma stared at Daniel, standing at the threshold of their past, her mind replayed the many years of their marriage. The laughter, the milestones, the dreams of a perfect future. In that moment, it all seemed like a distant memory, obscured by the weight of the betrayal that hung between them. The life she had worked so hard to protect, to build with him, was suddenly so fragile, so easily shattered. Daniel's face was pale, his eyes frantic. The woman, Sarah, had backed away from the table, her own confusion morphing into discomfort. Emma was aware of the shift in the room, the growing awareness among the few remaining patrons in the bar. It was as if time had stopped, all eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. But Emma remained unmoved. This wasn't about them. It was about her. "Emma," Daniel finally said, his voice shaky. This isn't what you think." His words were like a familiar song she'd heard far too many times, a song that had grown stale over the years. The same old excuses, the same lies. "This isn't what you think." How many times had he said that before? Every time he'd been late, every time his phone buzzed and he'd stepped out of the room, every time he went away on a business trip that turned out to be something else entirely. The pattern was unmistakable. Emma took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing herself to stay calm, to think clearly. For the first time in what felt like years, she wasn't reacting from a place of fear or hurt. She was operating on something else now. Something she hadn't even known was in her. "I'm not stupid, Daniel," she said, her voice steady. The words hung in the air, a challenge and a truth all at once. "I saw what I saw. I know exactly what's going on." Daniel's mouth opened and closed again, but no words came out. Emma could see the panic rising in his chest, the same panic she had seen in their early years of marriage when things hadn't been going as planned. Back then, he had been the confident one, the one who always had the answers, who could fix anything with a smile and a charming word. Now, she could see the cracks in that facade, the panic in his eyes as if he feared losing control. It wasn't just about his infidelity. It was about his life unraveling before him, about the secrets he had so carefully kept hidden for so long. "Are you really going to lie to me now?" Emma asked, her voice colder than she intended. Sarah shifted uncomfortably on the edge of the booth, clearly wanting to retreat, but uncertain of how to do so without causing more of a scene. Emma turned her gaze toward her, her eyes cool and calculating. She could feel Sarah's nervous energy, the way she kept glancing between Emma and Daniel, as if waiting for one of them to speak. "I think we both deserve to know the truth," Emma continued, her eyes never leaving Daniel. "And I'm done pretending that I don't." For a moment, Daniel said nothing. His gaze dropped to his lap, and Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. Finally, he exhaled sharply, as if deciding to speak, but his voice faltered when he did. "I never wanted to hurt you, Emma," he began, his tone low and hesitant. "You have to understand. This wasn't planned. I never thought it would get to this point. This is different. It's just..." Emma raised her hand to silence him. She wasn't interested in his justifications, in the emotional gymnastics he was trying to pull off. She was past that. "I don't need you to explain yourself, Daniel. I need you to tell me how long this has been going on." The question hung between them, heavy and expectant. Daniel shifted in his seat, his face contorted in distress. Sarah, still quiet, glanced down at her hands, clearly out of her depth. I've been seeing her for 6 months, Daniel finally confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not what you think. It's not serious. I was just..." "Don't!" Emma cut him off, her voice rising slightly. "Don't give me that. 6 months? And you're telling me it's not serious?" Daniel hesitated, his eyes flickering between Sarah and Emma. It was as if he was searching for a way out, for a way to explain away the unexplainable. But Emma wasn't interested in his words anymore. The truth was right there in front of her, clear as day. She had seen everything she needed to see. "I'm done, Daniel," she said, her voice finally steady. "I'm done pretending everything is fine when you've been living this double life." The words felt like a weight lifted from her shoulders. They were the words she hadn't known she needed to say until now. She could feel a shift inside her, a quiet resolution growing stronger with every beat of her heart. This wasn't the woman who had silently endured the late nights, the secretive behavior, the lies. This was someone different. This was the woman who was no longer willing to tolerate the facade Daniel had built around their life. "Emma, please," Daniel pleaded, his voice strained. This doesn't have to mean the end of everything. We can work through this. We can fix this." Emma's eyes narrowed. The audacity. The arrogance to think that everything he had done, every lie, every betrayal, could just be fixed with a few words. "No, Daniel," she said softly. "It doesn't work like that." For the first time in years, Emma felt like she was standing on solid ground. She had been waiting for this moment for so long, but she had never expected it to feel so freeing. The realization that she wasn't the only one betrayed, that Sarah too had been manipulated by Daniel's lies, left her with a strange sense of solidarity, but also a sense of anger. He had hurt so many people, and he hadn't even realized it. "I think you should leave," Emma said, turning towards Sarah. "I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but I think it's best if you go." Sarah nodded slowly, gathering her purse and standing up. There was no defiance, no argument, just the quiet recognition that her involvement in Daniel's life had come to an end. Emma watched as she walked away, the clinking of her heels echoing in the suddenly quiet bar. Emma turned back to Daniel, who was now sweating, his face red and full of regret. "I need time," Emma said firmly. "I need to think. And I need you to leave. I don't want you here right now." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. With a final glance at Emma, he stood up, leaving the booth without another word. The door to the bar closed behind him, and Emma was left alone. The silence that filled the space was deafening. The moment he was gone, Emma's composure began to falter. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the glass in front of her. She hadn't realized just how much of her had been holding her breath, waiting for this moment. And now that it was over, she felt an overwhelming flood of emotions she had long buried under the surface. But she wouldn't cry, not yet, not now. She stood, paid the tab, and walked out of the bar. The evening air hit her like a slap in the face, sharp and cool. But she welcomed it. She needed clarity. She needed time to process everything that had just happened. But most of all, she needed to know what came next. Emma's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she walked toward the front door. The late-night air, fresh and crisp, greeted her as she stepped outside. The sound of her heels on the pavement was the only thing that broke the silence, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. She hadn't been able to stop replaying the scene from the bar. Daniel's face, pale and panicked, his stammering excuses. None of it had made sense. But then again, what had made sense in the last few years? She'd spent so much time pretending that their life was flawless, brushing aside the tiny details that never added up. The late nights, the unexplained trips, the secretive phone calls. But now, seeing him with another woman, her suspicions had finally been validated. She had done everything right. She had been the supportive wife, the mother who balanced work with her children's needs. She had put Daniel first, always. But now, as she walked alone in the quiet night, the weight of her realization settled into her bones. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything else. The lies, the manipulation, the control, and the years she had unknowingly spent in the shadow of a man who never saw her as an equal partner. The house loomed ahead, its familiar silhouette outlined by the moonlight. The perfect suburban home. Emma had always loved it. Its open, airy spaces, the lush garden she spent weekends maintaining, and the sense of security it had provided for her family. It had been their dream home, the place where they had promised to grow old together. But now, it felt like a gilded cage. Inside, she found the house quiet, the sound of the television muted from the living room. Maya and Molly were upstairs, sleeping soundly, unaware of the storm that was about to hit their family. Emma paused for a moment in the doorway, watching them from the hallway. Maya, with her thoughtful brown eyes and her precocious intelligence, was already too aware of the emotional undercurrents between her parents. Molly, younger and more carefree, still held the innocence that Emma wished she could protect forever. But Emma knew she couldn't shield them from everything. Not anymore. She moved through the house in a daze, the silence amplifying the weight of her thoughts. She needed to act. She needed to take control before the whirlwind of emotions consumed her. Tomorrow she would take the first step. But tonight, she needed answers. She needed to confront Daniel. Not just about the affair, but about everything. The sound of her phone buzzing broke her reverie. It was a text from Riley Hartman, her divorce attorney. "I've scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning. We need to discuss next steps. This will not be easy, but it's the only way forward. I'll walk you through everything." Emma let out a long breath, grateful for the distraction. She needed this. She needed someone who was prepared to help her navigate the storm ahead. Riley had been a recommendation from a friend who had gone through a bitter divorce of her own. If there was anyone who could help her fight for what she deserved, it was Riley. She picked up the phone and replied quickly, "I'll be there. Thanks, Riley." The next morning, Emma stood in front of her bathroom mirror, the sharp reflection of her tired eyes staring back at her. The dark circles beneath her eyes spoke of the sleepless night she had just endured. Her thoughts spiraling from the moment she'd walked out of the bar. She hadn't told Daniel she was going to the lawyer's office. He hadn't even tried to call her, which spoke volumes. He was probably holed up in his office, too ashamed to face her, too desperate to think of a way out. Her mind was clear now. She knew what she had to do. She had to protect herself, her business, and her children. The financial empire Daniel had built wasn't just a symbol of his success. It was built on deception. Emma wasn't going to stand idly by while he tore everything apart. She would expose him for who he truly was, and she would make sure that their children grew up with the stability she had always dreamed of. As Emma prepared for the meeting with Riley, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Daniel. His name flashed across the screen, and for a moment, Emma's breath caught in her chest. She had been bracing herself for this moment. But now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to do. She didn't answer. Instead, she tossed her phone into her purse and left the house without looking back. Riley Hartman's office was sleek and professional. A place where corporate giants and high-net-worth clients could feel confident that their secrets would remain hidden and their interests protected. It felt like a fortress, and Emma was relieved by that. This wasn't the place for emotional breakdowns or second chances. This was where people came to fight. Riley greeted her warmly, but with the professionalism Emma had come to expect. She was a tall woman, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that matched the sharpness of her demeanor. Her brown eyes were observant, focused, and unafraid to ask the hard questions. "Have a seat, Emma. I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances," Riley said, gesturing to the sleek conference table. "But we'll get through this. I'll guide you through every step." Emma sat down, grateful for Riley's calm presence. I don't even know where to begin," she said, her voice still a little shaky. "I thought I knew everything about my marriage, but now it feels like everything's been a lie." Riley nodded. "I get that, and it's going to be a lot to process. But you're taking the first step by being here. So, let's start with what you do know, and then we'll figure out the next steps." Emma took a deep breath. Her thoughts settling into focus, she recounted everything. How she'd discovered Daniel's affair, her suspicions over the years, the clues she had ignored, the cracks in their perfect marriage. She told Riley about the affair with Sarah and Daniel's multiple excuses, each more absurd than the last. 6 months, Riley repeated, tapping her pen on the desk. That's a long time. And I'm sure there's more. If he's been living a double life, we'll need to dig deeper. Emma nodded. I'm sure there's more. I need to know everything. And I need to make sure I protect myself financially. Daniel's empire is built on lies. I don't trust him. Riley's eyes flickered with interest. You're right. We'll need to get a forensic accountant on this. There are probably hidden assets, especially with someone like Daniel. But we'll also need to be prepared for a fight. He won't go down without trying to protect himself. Emma met Riley's gaze, her resolve hardening. I'm not backing down. Not anymore. As Emma left the lawyer's office, she felt a surge of strength she hadn't realized was inside her. The weight of the last 15 years, the sacrifices, the compromises, the blind loyalty, was lifting. She wasn't going to fight for Daniel's forgiveness or for a version of their marriage that had never existed. She was fighting for her own future now. The rest of the day passed in a blur as Emma began making the necessary arrangements. She called her financial advisor, met with her accountant, and started reviewing the details of her business contracts. Every step she took made her feel more empowered, more in control of her life. But the underlying anxiety about what Daniel might do next gnawed at her. That evening, as she walked into her quiet home, she took a moment to look around. The pictures on the walls, the perfectly placed furniture, the quiet hum of life, all of it had been built with so much care. It felt like a lifetime ago, and in many ways, it was. Emma knew there was no going back to the life she had before. But as she climbed the stairs to check on her sleeping children, she felt a sense of peace settling over her. No matter what happened next, she would fight for them, for her future, for her dignity. And no one, not even Daniel, could take that from her. The next morning, Emma woke up early, as she had been doing for the past several weeks, a habit she had developed to stay ahead of her mounting to-do list. But today was different. Today, she wasn't thinking about client meetings, design projects, or the usual chaos of balancing her business with family life. Today, she had a singular focus: uncovering the full extent of Daniel's betrayal. Her phone buzzed as she sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee. It was a message from Riley. I've arranged for Eleanor to meet with you. She's a forensic accountant, and she specializes in uncovering hidden assets in divorce cases. She'll walk you through everything. Let's make sure Daniel's secrets don't stay buried for much longer. The words on the screen felt like a weight being lifted off her shoulders. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was taking control. For the first time in years, she had a plan that wasn't dictated by Daniel's whims. The conversation with Riley yesterday had been eye-opening. Emma had always assumed that their life was solid, stable, secure, and rooted in their combined efforts. But now, after Daniel's confession, she realized that everything had been built on lies. If Daniel could keep such a massive secret from her, what else had he been hiding? By the time Eleanor arrived at Emma's house later that afternoon, Emma had already reviewed the most recent financial statements Daniel had left lying around. The more she looked, the more she realized how much she hadn't known. There were accounts she had never seen, investments that hadn't been discussed, and even business ventures that seemed to come out of nowhere. Eleanor, a poised woman in her mid-40s with a no-nonsense approach, stepped into Emma's living room with a leather briefcase in hand. She was efficient, all business, and Emma immediately felt a sense of relief. This was exactly the kind of professional she needed to help her navigate the murky waters ahead. "I understand the situation," Eleanor said after they exchanged pleasantries. "Let's dive into these financials and see what we're working with. The sooner we uncover everything, the sooner we can begin to make the right moves." The accountant opened her briefcase and spread out the documents in front of Emma, who barely noticed the time pass as Eleanor methodically sifted through each page. Emma felt as though she were in a trance, the weight of her previous life slipping further away with each new discovery. Eleanor pointed out large withdrawals from their joint accounts, numerous transfers to offshore accounts Emma didn't recognize, and a handful of companies tied to Daniel's name, none of which Emma had ever heard of. "Daniel's been running a side operation," Eleanor muttered under her breath as she scrolled through one of the spreadsheets. "He's been moving money around for months, maybe even years." Emma's stomach churned. She could feel the betrayal deep in her chest. Daniel had been spending their money, her money, on God knows what. The hidden assets, the offshore accounts. It was all coming into focus now. "So, what do we do next?" Emma asked, her voice strained but steady. Eleanor looked up at her, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "We'll follow the money trail, and then we'll make sure that every cent he's hidden is accounted for. From there, we'll make a move, but it's going to take time, Emma. There's a lot more here than we initially thought." Emma nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. But there was a sense of clarity, too. She wasn't alone in this anymore. She had the right team behind her, and together they would uncover every last secret Daniel had been hiding. After Eleanor left, Emma sat at her kitchen table, her mind reeling. She had always prided herself on being a diligent and responsible businesswoman. Yet the thought that she had been kept in the dark for so long about their financial situation, about the empire Daniel had built on lies, left her with an unsettled feeling. But as the sun set and the shadows of the evening crept into the house, Emma steeled herself. She had already made the decision to move forward with the divorce. But the deeper she dug into Daniel's secrets, the more she realized just how complex this would be. It wasn't just about his infidelity. It was about a lifetime of lies that had been carefully constructed to keep her in the dark. A few days later, Emma received another phone call from Riley. This time, the conversation was about more than just the financials. "We've got a lead on his offshore holdings," Riley said, her voice low but controlled. "I think it's time we start pushing for a temporary injunction. We need to freeze his accounts before he moves everything around." Emma swallowed hard. The prospect of freezing Daniel's assets, of taking that first step toward tearing down the life they had built, was terrifying. But it was also necessary. She wasn't about to let him destroy everything they had worked for and everything she had worked for by hiding money. "Do it," Emma said firmly. "I'm ready." The next few days felt like a blur as Emma threw herself into the legal process, meeting with Riley and preparing the necessary paperwork. Each moment she spent at the lawyer's office or on the phone with her accountant chipped away at the life she had once known. It was a painful but necessary process. As her understanding of Daniel's deceit grew, so did her resolve. She had told herself that the moment she discovered his affair was the turning point. But now, as she started to see just how deeply Daniel had betrayed her, she realized that her journey wasn't just about her marriage. It was about her life, her business, and her future. The woman she was becoming didn't just exist to stand by Daniel's side. She was someone capable of standing on her own, of rebuilding the life she had nearly lost. It wasn't just about financial assets. It was about control over her future, over her children's well-being, and over her own path forward. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Emma sat in the living room alone, the weight of the evening sinking in. She had made progress, but she wasn't finished. There was still so much more to uncover, so much more to learn. She glanced at her phone, half expecting a message from Daniel. But the screen remained blank. He hadn't reached out. Not that she cared. She had made her decision. She wasn't waiting for him to fix things. She wasn't waiting for him to apologize. As she turned off the lights and headed upstairs to her bedroom, Emma felt a strange sense of calm. The journey ahead would be difficult, and the path would not be easy. But she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer the woman who had been deceived. She was the woman who was taking back control, and she would fight for everything she had built and everything she deserved. Emma stood in front of the mirror, her reflection staring back at her as she adjusted the hem of her coat. She was meeting Sarah today, the woman who had unknowingly become entangled in Daniel's web of lies. It felt strange, almost surreal, that she was about to sit down with the one person who had been, in many ways, just as deceived as she had been. Yet, in this moment, Emma couldn't help but feel a flicker of sympathy. How many women had Daniel manipulated? How many lives had he shattered along the way? Despite the pity she felt, Emma knew that meeting Sarah was necessary. She needed to understand the full scope of what Daniel had been hiding, and Sarah might hold the missing pieces. After a few moments of reflection, Emma left the house and drove to the cafe where they had agreed to meet. The warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee greeted her as she entered, her eyes immediately scanning the room for Sarah. She spotted her at a corner table, nervously fidgeting with her napkin. Sarah was younger than Emma, her hair long and dark, her style effortlessly chic. She looked almost out of place in the cozy, casual environment, like someone who had spent too much time in high-end restaurants and designer boutiques. Emma hesitated for just a moment before walking over. Sarah looked up as she approached, her expression initially confused, then quickly shifting to understanding. "Emma," Sarah said softly, standing up to greet her. There was a nervousness in her voice that Emma could relate to. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." Emma forced a smile as she sat down. "I think we both need to understand exactly what's been going on, don't you?" Sarah nodded, the unease still lingering in her features. She had a vulnerability that Emma hadn't expected. There was no arrogance, no defensiveness, just a quiet admission of the confusion and hurt she had undoubtedly felt. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice low. "I had no idea you were married. I really didn't. He told me he was divorced, and, well, I believed him. He was so convincing. He said his ex-wife lived in Chicago and they had an amicable arrangement for visitation. He told me you were distant, that you didn't understand him, and he just needed someone who could make him feel alive again." The words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. Daniel had said all of that to Sarah, feeding her the same lies he'd been feeding Emma for years. But there was something else in Sarah's eyes now. Regret, disappointment, and a faint sense of betrayal that Emma hadn't expected to see. "I understand," Emma said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I've been on the other side of those lies too. But I need you to tell me everything, Sarah." "How long has it been going on?" Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment as though she were mentally preparing herself. "About 6 months. I met him at a charity event. He was charming, funny, and he told me he needed someone who understood what it was like to be successful. We started seeing each other a couple of months after that. And it just escalated. He said he was ready to start a new life with me. That he was done with his old marriage and that you and he were just, well, you were just living separate lives. Emma's chest tightened as she absorbed Sarah's words. It wasn't just the affair. It was the picture Daniel had painted for Sarah. The life he'd made her believe in. And now, as they sat here together, Emma realized how much he had manipulated them both. I never asked him about his kids, Sarah continued, her eyes downcast. I didn't want to pry. He told me he had a teenage daughter from his first marriage. But he said she lived with her mom in Chicago, so I never met her. I thought that was normal. But I'm realizing now, none of it was normal. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. She wanted to be angry, so desperately angry at both Daniel and Sarah for the web of lies that had been spun around her life. But Sarah wasn't the enemy here. She was another victim, just as much as Emma had been. It wasn't normal, Emma said softly. None of this was. And I need to know everything, Sarah. Every detail you can give me. Daniel's been hiding a lot, and I need to understand just how deep this goes. Sarah met Emma's gaze, and for the first time, Emma saw the truth in her eyes. There was no longer any pretense, no defense. Only the rawness of someone who had been used, manipulated, and hurt. I can help you, Sarah said. I want to. I don't know everything, but I know more than he's telling you. I found something the other day when I was at his apartment. It's not much, but it could help you understand what he's really been doing. Emma leaned forward, her heart racing. What did you find? Sarah hesitated for a moment before pulling out a folder from her bag. She slid it across the table, her hands trembling slightly. I found some papers. Bank statements, receipts. I don't know what they mean, but I think they're related to his business dealings. I'm not sure, but I think he's been hiding money. A lot of it. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. The financial proof she needed to take this fight to the next level. She reached for the folder, her fingers brushing Sarah's. Thank you, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. You don't know what this means to me. Sarah gave a small nod, her eyes still filled with uncertainty. I don't expect anything in return. I want you to know that I didn't know what he was doing to you. I had no idea. Emma took a deep breath. This was not the woman she had expected to meet today. Sarah wasn't an enemy. She was someone who had been just as manipulated, just as lied to as Emma had been. I know, Emma said, her voice steady. And now we both know what we need to do. As they parted ways, Emma felt a strange sense of relief. The pieces of Daniel's puzzle were starting to come together. The lies, the manipulation, the financial deception, it was all coming into focus. But even more than that, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Empowerment. She wasn't going to let Daniel control her life anymore. She was taking control now, for her children, for her future. She opened the folder Sarah had given her as she walked back to her car. Her fingers trembled slightly as she scanned through the documents. They weren't just receipts and statements. They were a roadmap of Daniel's hidden life. Every transfer, every business deal, every shady transaction he'd tried to bury was laid out in front of her. And for the first time in years, Emma realized that this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. The weight of the folder Sarah had given her felt heavy in Emma's hands as she sat in her car, the engine idling, but her mind racing. The documents were a treasure trove of information, every receipt, every transfer, every hidden account. Daniel's secrets laid bare. But even with this evidence, Emma knew that the hardest part was still ahead. She couldn't just use these papers to hurt him. She had to use them to protect herself and her children. The drive to Riley Hartman's office felt like it took forever, the minutes stretching out as Emma's thoughts ran wild. She had been preparing for this moment for days, but now that it was here, she felt the reality of the situation settling in. There was no turning back. Not anymore. When she arrived, she was immediately ushered into Riley's office, which was sleek and minimalist. Every detail carefully designed to convey authority. The cold steel of the furniture mirrored the seriousness of the situation. And Emma felt herself settling into the chair across from Riley, the sense of purpose she had been carrying for weeks now solidifying into something undeniable. "You've made progress," Riley said, glancing down at the folder Emma had placed on the table. She immediately recognized the significance of the documents. "I'm impressed. This will make all the difference in the world." Emma nodded, her fingers tightly gripping the edge of the table. "I don't know how much this will really change. Daniel's always been able to talk his way out of anything. But now it feels like he's running out of places to hide." Riley's eyes locked onto hers, a look of quiet resolve passing between them. "That's because he is. The fact that you've gathered this much is invaluable. It's not just about his infidelity anymore, Emma. This is about the life he's built on lies and deceit, and we're going to make sure he pays for it." Emma's breath caught. She had always known Daniel was a master manipulator, but hearing Riley's words made everything feel real in a way that the quiet observations and suspicions of the past weeks hadn't. She had been living in his shadow for so long, unquestioning, always assuming that his decisions were the right ones. But now she understood that it wasn't just his lies that had hurt her. It was his manipulation of their entire life. "Let's go over everything," Riley continued. "We'll need to freeze his accounts and make sure he can't move the money around. We need to act fast before he gets wind of your next move." Emma nodded, her voice steady. "I don't want him to have any control anymore. He's had it for years. It's my turn now." The next few days were a whirlwind of legal action. Riley worked quickly, using the documents Emma had gathered to file the necessary motions for an injunction to freeze Daniel's accounts. Eleanor, the forensic accountant, worked alongside Riley's team, digging deeper into the web of offshore holdings and financial misdeeds Daniel had hidden from view. It was all happening so fast that Emma barely had time to process it. But she wasn't complaining. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. One afternoon, just as Emma was wrapping up a meeting with a potential client, Riley called. "It's done," Riley said, her voice calm but with an edge of triumph. "We've frozen Daniel's assets. He won't be able to access them until the court orders otherwise. We're also filing for full disclosure of his financials. He's going to have to come clean about everything." Emma's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment when Daniel's carefully constructed world began to crumble. "What happens next?" "We move forward with the divorce filing," Riley explained, "and we go for everything. Primary custody of your children, a fair division of assets, and the maximum amount of spousal support possible given the circumstances. We'll use everything we have to make sure he doesn't get away with this." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. She hadn't realized just how much she had been holding her breath until now. The reality was setting in. The next few months would be long and exhausting, But this wasn't about just surviving. This was about reclaiming what was rightfully hers and building a life that Daniel had no part in. "Thank you, Riley," Emma said quietly, "for everything." "Don't thank me yet," Riley replied, her voice wry but still determined. "The real fight starts now." The days that followed were filled with meetings, paperwork, and countless legal procedures that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of her. Emma's business, which had been a bright spot in her life for so long, had to take a back seat as she focused on preparing for the divorce proceedings. She put in long hours, making sure that every detail was in place, every angle covered. But even in the midst of the chaos, Emma never let herself forget what mattered most: her children. Every night she would tuck Maya and Molly into bed, pressing kisses to their foreheads, and tell them she loved them, words that now more than ever held so much weight. They were the reason she was doing this, the reason she had to find the strength to keep moving forward, no matter how hard it became. It wasn't just about financial security or taking back what Daniel had stolen from her. It was about their future, about showing them that even in the face of betrayal, even when everything seemed impossible, they had the power to rebuild their lives and rise stronger than before. Daniel's response to the legal actions was swift, but it was far from the smooth-talking manipulation Emma had come to expect from him. Instead of the usual barrage of denials and anger, his response was an unsettling silence. His lawyers had made a formal request to settle out of court, offering Emma a generous financial package in exchange for a quiet divorce and joint custody of the children. Emma had expected this. Daniel always liked to think that money could solve anything, but she wasn't going to fall for it this time. She sat down with Riley and reviewed the settlement offer, her fingers tapping nervously on the table as she scanned the terms. "This isn't enough," Riley said firmly after a moment. "This is what he thinks you'll accept. But you deserve more, much more." Emma nodded, a fire igniting in her chest. "I want full custody. I want the house. I want everything." Riley raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" Emma's response was immediate, no hesitation in her voice. "I'm sure." Later that night, after another long day of meetings and phone calls, Emma found herself sitting at the kitchen table, going through some papers for a design project. But her mind kept drifting back to the legal battle ahead, the future she was fighting for, and the uncertain path that lay before her. She knew the fight wouldn't be easy. She knew Daniel would pull out all the stops to try and win. But she also knew one thing: no matter what happened, she was ready. And this time, she wasn't going to let him win. The next few days were a blur. Emma felt like she was living in two different worlds. The one where she was a mother, making breakfast for Maya and Molly, helping them with their schoolwork. And then there was the world of high-stakes legal maneuvering, where every document, every financial transaction, and every secret of Daniel's was being exposed, one layer at a time. Each time she met with Riley or Eleanor, she felt a strange combination of anger and relief. The anger was obvious. It was anger at Daniel for betraying her trust, for deceiving her for years, and for using their family's finances as his personal playground. But the relief came in small doses. With each new piece of information, Emma felt herself pulling further out of the fog that had clouded her perception of her marriage. Slowly but surely, she was starting to see Daniel for who he truly was, and it wasn't a man who cared about her or their family. On one particular afternoon, after another meeting with Eleanor, Emma found herself sitting at her desk, reviewing some more of the documents she had collected. The forensic accountant had uncovered even more hidden assets, more than she had ever imagined. What she thought had been a few small accounts had grown into a complex web of financial activity, spanning across different countries, involving shell companies, real estate investments, and offshore trusts that Daniel had used to funnel money into anonymous accounts. As Emma sifted through the documents, her mind raced. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was about everything Daniel had built, everything he had taken, and everything he had hidden from her for so long. She leaned back in her chair, letting the weight of the situation settle over her. She had known Daniel was wealthy, but the true extent of his wealth and his dishonesty was mind-blowing. He had built an empire on lies, using their marriage and family as a smokescreen to hide his shady dealings. Emma's thoughts were interrupted by the soft buzz of her phone. It was another message from Riley. "I've got the latest from the investigator. He's found something major, something that could change everything. Meet me at the office in an hour." Her heart skipped a beat. Whatever Riley had found, it couldn't be good. When Emma arrived at Riley's office, she was greeted with a new sense of urgency. Riley's assistant ushered her in immediately, and as Emma entered the room, she could feel the tension in the air. The stack of documents on the desk, the serious expressions, the sense that they were on the brink of something big. "I'm glad you could make it," Riley said, her voice sharp and focused. "This just came in, and it changes the game. Sit down. We need to talk." Emma sat, her stomach twisting in anticipation. Riley opened a folder, pulling out a few pages and pushing them toward her. "This is the result of a thorough investigation into Daniel's real estate holdings and offshore accounts," Riley explained. "What we've found is staggering. He's been moving money around for years, using your shared assets to fund private accounts that have no connection to your family or your business. But that's not all." Emma leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "What else?" Riley glanced at the documents before looking Emma in the eye. "He's been planning to leave. Not just you, but the entire life he's built. There are detailed plans for him to relocate, with assets and money stashed in multiple countries. He's been setting up an exit strategy, and it's not just about his marriage. It's about securing a new life for himself, at the expense of everything he's built with you." Emma's breath caught in her chest. "What do you mean, exit strategy?" Riley pulled out a piece of paper from the folder, holding it up for Emma to see. It was a list of cities, each with a brief note next to them. Denver, Austin, Phoenix. Under each city, there was information about cost of living, real estate trends, and most alarmingly, tax laws that were favorable to someone in Daniel's financial position. "It looks like he's been doing his research on where he can hide out, where he can escape to without the public scrutiny that would come from staying here," Riley explained. "This is the final piece of the puzzle. He's not just trying to avoid financial ruin. He's planning to disappear." Emma could feel the anger rising in her chest. All these years, she had thought that she was sharing everything with Daniel, that they were building a life together. But all along, he had been planning his exit. And now, it was clear. He wasn't just betraying her emotionally with the affair. He was preparing to destroy everything they had, leaving her with nothing but the pieces to pick up. "This is his contingency plan," Riley said, her voice firm. "And we're going to use it against him." Emma swallowed hard, her mind spinning. "How can we do that? How do we stop him?" Riley leaned forward, her gaze intense. "We're going to act quickly. We file for an emergency injunction to freeze his assets before he can move them. Then we make sure that all of his actions, his fraudulent transfers, his secret accounts, become public record. We'll use everything we have to ensure he can't just walk away and start over. He'll have to answer for everything he's done. Emma nodded slowly, the weight of the situation finally settling into her bones. This wasn't just about a betrayal of trust. This was about a man who had been using her, using their family, as pawns in a game he had been playing for years. And now, it was time to stop him. "You're sure this will work?" Emma asked, her voice tight but determined. "I'm sure," Riley said, her expression hardening. "We have everything we need to go after him. And once we start, there's no turning back. But you're right to feel the urgency. He's got the money, the resources, and the connections to make this messy. But we've got the truth, and that's what matters." Emma's heart pounded as she thought about what lay ahead. The fight wasn't going to be easy. But now, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her children, for her future, for everything Daniel had tried to take from her. That evening, Emma sat alone in her living room, the documents from Riley's office spread out on the coffee table before her. The walls of their home, once a symbol of everything she had ever wanted, now felt cold and empty. She glanced at the photos of their children, their smiles frozen in time, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. But despite the overwhelming sense of loss that threatened to consume her, Emma also felt something else. A quiet strength, rising from deep within her. Daniel had underestimated her. He thought he could hide behind his wealth, behind his lies. But Emma knew better now. She wasn't going to let him walk away from the wreckage he had created. She wasn't going to let him destroy everything she had built. Tomorrow, they would make their move. And this time, Emma was going to make sure that Daniel paid for every lie he had told. The morning after Emma's meeting with Riley was the calm before the storm. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light over the city as Emma sat in her kitchen, a steaming mug of coffee cradled in her hands. She hadn't slept well. How could she, with everything hanging in the balance? But she wasn't thinking about sleep now. She was thinking about the next steps, about the battle that lay ahead. Today would be the day. Today, Emma was going to take control once and for all. The plan was in motion. The legal team was ready. Riley had prepared everything, and now Emma just had to trust the process. Her phone buzzed on the table, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Riley. "We're filing the injunction this morning. Be prepared. Daniel's lawyers will be notified soon." Emma exhaled slowly, a deep, steadying breath. The waiting had always been the hardest part. The fear of what Daniel would do next, how he would try to manipulate the situation, how he would try to control the narrative. But now, she was ready. She had to be. As the day unfolded, Emma found herself caught between two worlds. The one where she was a mother, organizing lunches for Maya and Molly, making sure their schoolwork was on track. And then there was the other world, the one where she was preparing for a confrontation that would define the next phase of her life. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. Every email she sent, every call she made, was a step toward reclaiming her future. By midday, Emma was at home with the kids, the tension in the air palpable. She had kept things light during breakfast, trying to hide her anxiety behind a smile. But she knew that things were about to change. She was still unsure how Maya and Molly would react when the news finally broke, how they would process the collapse of the family unit they had always known. She had been preparing herself for that conversation, but she wasn't ready. Not yet. At around 1:00 p.m., Riley called again. Emma's stomach dropped when she saw the name on the screen. "Emma," Riley said, her voice tinged with urgency, "the injunction is in. Daniel's assets have been frozen, and we've got full disclosure on the offshore accounts. It's all going according to plan. But we need to move quickly. Daniel will try to get ahead of us. His lawyers are already circling, and they're going to push back hard. Do you think they'll try to settle? Emma asked, her mind racing. He's always tried to buy his way out of things. Riley's laugh was dry, almost bitter. He'll try, but now we have the upper hand. We'll be able to push for full custody and a fair division of assets. We're not backing down, Emma. Not this time. Emma nodded, even though Riley couldn't see her. I'm not backing down either. I've had enough. Later that afternoon, the phone call Emma had been dreading finally came. It was Daniel. She had been expecting it, but that didn't make it any easier to hear his voice again. His number flashed on her screen, and for a moment, she just stared at it. It had been days since they last spoke, and in that time, everything had changed. It felt surreal to think that the man on the other end of the line was the same man she had married, her partner, her confidant, the man who had broken her trust in ways she never thought possible. Finally, she answered. Emma? Daniel's voice came through, tinged with something that might have been panic, but was mostly self-preservation. We need to talk. I know what you've done. You've gone behind my back, and I don't understand why you're doing this. We were building something together, and now you're destroying it. Emma felt the familiar flicker of anger rise in her chest, but she squashed it down, her voice cold and controlled. We weren't building anything, Daniel. You were building a life of lies, a life where you used me and our family for your own gain. And I'm done. I'm done pretending that everything is okay. I'm done pretending that we can go on like this. She paused for a moment, letting the silence between them stretch. She had never been one to confront him directly, to take charge of a situation. But today was different. Today, she was speaking for herself. I've filed for divorce, Emma continued, and I'm not backing down. The injunction has already gone through. Your accounts are frozen. You won't be able to hide anything anymore. Daniel's voice was laced with disbelief. You can't do this. You're throwing everything away for this? For what? This ridiculous vendetta you have against me? Emma clenched her jaw, refusing to let his words break her composure. It's not a vendetta, Daniel. It's about the truth. The truth you've been hiding from me for years. And I won't let you continue to manipulate me or our children any longer. You're not going to walk away from this without facing the consequences. She could hear him pacing on the other end, his breath quickening. I'll fight this. You don't think I'll fight? You've been nothing but a liability for me. Your business, your freelancing. You've always been too distracted to see what I've done for us. I built this family. I built everything. And now you're just going to throw it all away? Emma's pulse quickened, but she wasn't about to let him drag her into his web of guilt. You didn't build anything, Daniel. You used me to build your empire. But this isn't your empire anymore. This is my life, and I'm taking it back. She hung up before he could say another word. Later that night, Emma stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker below. Her mind was still spinning from the conversation with Daniel. He had sounded desperate, like a man who knew his world was crumbling, and he had no idea how to stop it. She couldn't help but feel a small twinge of satisfaction at the thought. But there was something else, something deeper, that kept her from fully relishing the victory. It was the thought of her children, and what all of this would mean for them. The divorce, the legal battles, the financial destruction Daniel had wrought. It wasn't just her life that had been torn apart. It was theirs too. And yet, even in the midst of all this chaos, Emma knew one thing. She was stronger than she had ever been. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her family, for a future where she could look at her children and know that they were safe, that they would grow up without the shadow of Daniel's lies hanging over them. This was just the beginning, and Emma was ready. The next few weeks felt like a blur to Emma. Long days filled with meetings, legal motions, and constant back-and-forth communication with Riley's team. Every step forward felt like an uphill battle. But Emma was no longer the woman who would cower in the face of Daniel's manipulation. She was becoming someone else entirely. Someone stronger, more focused, and ready to take back what had been stolen from her. The house felt different now. The once familiar hum of daily life, where everything revolved around maintaining the illusion of a perfect family, had been replaced with an uncomfortable quiet. Maya and Molly had begun to ask more questions about their father's whereabouts, about the strange tension that had settled between their parents. Emma had tried to shield them from the worst of it, but the truth was starting to seep in, no matter how much she tried to protect them. On a particularly quiet evening, as Emma sat alone in the living room, the phone rang. It was Riley. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she picked up, hoping for good news. "Emma," Riley said, her voice steady but with an undertone of urgency. "We're making progress. We've uncovered even more about Daniel's hidden accounts and investments. The judge is leaning toward granting the injunction in your favor, and things are looking promising for custody as well." Emma's breath caught in her chest. "Is it over yet? Can we move forward?" Riley's voice softened. "Not yet. The next few weeks are crucial. Daniel's lawyers are pulling every trick they can think of to drag this out. They'll fight tooth and nail to keep the financials buried, to keep you from getting what you're entitled to. But we're not backing down." Emma's fingers tightened around the phone. "I'm not backing down either." As the days passed, the court proceedings grew more intense. The emotional toll of the legal battle was starting to wear on Emma, but she refused to show any weakness. She was no longer a passive participant in her own life. She had taken control, and she wasn't going to let Daniel dictate her future any longer. One afternoon, Emma found herself sitting in the conference room with Riley, reviewing the latest round of legal documents. The weight of the divorce settlement proposal on the table was overwhelming. It was more than just money. It was the finalization of everything Daniel had done to her, every betrayal, every lie, now written in black and white. "We're almost there," Riley said, scanning the papers with a sharp eye. "This is the last piece. If we accept these terms, we'll ensure that Daniel's assets remain frozen, and you'll get everything you deserve, but I need you to think carefully. This is your future, your children's future." Emma stared at the settlement proposal in front of her. The number was staggering, far more than she had ever imagined. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about securing a stable future for her family. A future where she could finally breathe, free from the weight of Daniel's deceit. "Take it," Emma said, her voice firm. "We'll accept these terms." The following weeks were filled with court dates, meetings with financial experts, and long conversations with Riley about the details of the settlement. Daniel fought every inch of the way, but it was clear to everyone involved that he was losing ground. His facade was crumbling, and his ability to control the narrative was slipping away. One evening, just as Emma was wrapping up another long day, she received a text from Daniel. The message was short and blunt. "We need to talk." For a moment, she hesitated. The last time they had spoken, it had been a confrontation, a moment where Emma had taken back control. She had no intention of falling into old patterns. But something about the message made her pause. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Daniel would finally have to face the consequences of his actions. They met at a neutral location, one of those upscale restaurants where the rich and powerful tried to maintain their image of control. Emma was dressed simply but confidently, her eyes sharp, her posture strong. Daniel, in his typical suit and tie, looked a little worse for wear, his usual confidence replaced by the nervous energy of a man on the brink of losing everything. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You know I didn't mean for things to get this far," he began, his voice low and steady. "I made mistakes, yes. But we can still work things out. I want to fix this." Emma stared at him for a moment, feeling the years of resentment and betrayal flood her chest. She had spent so long trying to make this marriage work, trying to be the wife he wanted, the mother he needed. But now, sitting here in front of him, she realized how much of herself she had sacrificed for a man who had never truly valued her. "No, Daniel," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You don't get to fix this. You've burned every bridge we had. What you did to me, to our children, it can't be undone. You lied to me. You manipulated me. And now it's time for you to face the consequences." His face flushed, the familiar arrogance returning for a brief moment. "You think this is all about the money, don't you? You're willing to ruin everything for a paycheck. I thought you were better than this." Emma took a slow breath, choosing her words carefully. "It's not about the money, Daniel. It's about the truth. You've been living a lie, and you don't get to make that decision for me anymore. You don't get to decide my worth or the future of our children." The room was silent for a long moment. Daniel's anger simmered beneath the surface, but there was something else there too. Regret. Realization. The realization that his world was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Is this it then?" Daniel asked quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "Is this how it ends?" Emma met his gaze without flinching. "This is how it ends, Daniel. You've had your chance, and now it's my turn." By the time Emma left the restaurant, she felt lighter than she had in years. It wasn't the conversation itself that had freed her. It was the realization that she was no longer bound to Daniel's lies. She had faced him, and she had taken her power back. That night, as she tucked Maya and Molly into bed, she whispered a silent promise to herself. No matter what happened next, she would ensure that they never felt the weight of their father's betrayal. She would protect them from the lies, from the chaos, and from the man who had broken their family apart, but she would also give them something better. A future that was theirs to create. Emma stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching them sleep, the weight of the past few months lifting from her shoulders. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rebuilding, stronger than ever before. And this time, nothing could stop her.